Okay, good. Welcome, Dr. Buschmeyer. I'm looking forward to taking time for care.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction and the possibility to talk to you in the diversity talk today, which might be a completely different topic from everything you heard before in the last days, but I hope it fits a bit into your mind and you get some new ideas. I want to talk to you about care and care work, and I called my presentation Time for Care because I thought maybe it's interesting for you to think about care and why care needs time and why this might be difficult to combine with being a scientist in a natural science, but also in all other scientists, as I'm a social scientist and might have the same problems. So I will talk a bit about time. What I will do today is, first of all, I will introduce you into the concept of care. What does care mean? Why is care important? And how is care distributed in society? So who does care and who doesn't? Or who thinks he or she doesn't? How is care distributed between gender, and what does this mean for gender relationships? What are typical stereotypes of masculinity and femininity that underlie this distribution of care work? And why might this be problematic? I say for you, but I mean for all of us. And I have some suggestions for a fairer distribution of care and some questions to you to discuss maybe with each other in the end of the presentation. So what is care? What does care mean? I don't know how many of you have ever thought about the concept of care. Care is supposed to be everything that keeps society and that keeps people alive and is needed in the background of that, what we usually call work. So what I want to present is that care is work as well. This includes, for example, raising, feeding, nourished children, but also means that all of you have once been a child that was cared for, otherwise you wouldn't be here. It also means that there's food prepared for you, clothes are washed, you have to do this yourself or somebody else does this for you. It also means homes are closed. It also means the rooms in this hotel are cleaned for you, maybe every day, but maybe every second day. But somebody has to do this, and often this is rather invisible. And this is one of the problems that care has. It is invisible, and it seems to be unimportant because you can't see it and it's often not paid for, which also makes it a bit more invisible. And people who have to do care work are also often doing this in a surrounding where they are not seen very well. But, and this is important for what is coming now, I want to suggest that care is work as well, and that is why I always talk about care work and paid work, because if I just say work, this might be just one side of working. As I just said, everybody needs care, and there are times in life when this is more important than in others, for example, at the beginning of life or in the end. But there are also periods in life that might be just in between, when you care for other people, care for your own children, care for your older parents, care for your partner or whoever. And this is often not paid for if you do it privately. In the family, this is often not paid for at all. And in the professional way, it's often cared for very poorly, as we see, for example, in elderly care or the discussions about for example, during the pandemic, we saw this in the hospitals. And something very special is that care needs time. This is something which you can't always plan. You can't plan, my child will be hungry in half an hour, because maybe it's hungry in 10 minutes, and then you have to directly go and feed your child or change the diaper or whatever. Care is nothing that you can rationalize very good, as we also see at the moment in hospitals and elderly care. The idea of rationalizing all this makes it very, it leaves something out that care needs, because care relationships usually improve by more time invested. You all know the closer you get with somebody, the better you might understand what he or she needs. And it's the same, for example, with small children, which usually people don't get just to feed them, but they want to have strong relationships with them. And this time that care needs is very differently distributed. In Germany, and these are data from before the pandemic, women, and these are all women, either if they are mothers or not, perform about 1.5 hours more unpaid care work per day than men do. And this gets even a lot more when they have children. So it's 2.5 hours more care work per day. And this means children in all ages. And children, as you all know, need different amount of care if they are like 2-month-old or if they are 13. Even if both partners work full-time in a relationship, usually women do 1.25 hours more care work a day than their partners. And this means that a large part of work that is done in society is unpaid, unseen, and economically ignored. It leads to unequal power relations within families, for example, because one has to do the care work. We can't just ignore that this has to be done. It also means that there are still quite gendered role models for the younger generation. If children only see their mother doing the care work, this leads again to ideas of who is responsible for care work. And on the other hand, if they also see their fathers doing it, this is a role model to the other direction. It also leads to hierarchies within the labor market and in the global competition, as people come from other countries to do care work in our rich countries. People coming from poorer areas in the world, where again their own children have to be cared for by again other women, usually. So women are circling around the world to do care work, and in one country and one place of the world, children have to grow up without their mothers, for example. And this was, what I just said, was before the pandemic, and now we have the data from the pandemic, and you can see, which is not surprising, in the first German lockdown, mothers and fathers had to do a lot more care work regarding spending time with their children. And we had this discussion in Germany about the so-called retraditionalization. So the question was, now, can we see from these numbers that, again, all the care work is done by women, by mothers, or can we see, fathers did quite a lot? And this is a good example for numbers that can be interpreted in two different ways, because on the one hand, you see that fathers doubled their care time, which is really good, but mothers couldn't really double their care time because then there was nothing left. In April, June 2020, mothers spent about 10.6 hours per day with their children, which means they couldn't have the time for their employment, for their paid work, or they had to reduce time for sleeping, self-care, and housework. And this is what studies show us they all did. Not all. It's always not all, but many mothers had to reduce, for example, their sleeping time. And especially self-care, which is also a part of care, was really dropped. Nobody had time to spend, like going to nice appointments with friends or whatever. So now I found you some stereotypes regarding care work and paid work, which are male and female stereotypes. And if I'm coming from gender studies, this means male is supposed to be like in combination with masculinity, with men, and female is meant to be in combination with women. But of course it can also change. It's just supposed to be male and female. And a typical male stereotype is a person who is freed from care work or has not much to do regarding care work. This might also be the case at work. So to say, people working the real work at the workplace, like technology research in your field, and it's typical female to do also the care work at work. I don't know how many of you have heard, maybe you write the notes because you have the nicer handwriting. This is very typical that women do this and hear this if they are working in mixed teams. They are often responsible for the coffee, for buying the birthday presents for the team, like all these things that are not the real work, and that's what not leads to a scientific success. But it has to be done, at least if you want to have a more friendly environment. So this is also coming from quite stereotype ideas of femininity. Also long working hours, being available, being always available, going to international conference, going wherever, while for the female stereotype, at least if thinking about mothers, might be that longer working times must be organized. They are not that easy to be always available. Then you see leading positions, supporting positions. Of course, this is stereotypes. Of course, this is not true for everybody, but this is the typical idea. We also know the term of active fatherhood, which is often supposed to mean men are taking 2 months of parental leave. At least in the German legislation, this is the typical way of taking parental leave. While active motherhood, we don't really have this term. We have the term working mom, which is like you can't compare this again to working dad. It doesn't really make sense in this wording. But the active motherhood, if you want to say it like this, means part-time work for a very long period in life, and this has, of course, consequences for income and for pension payments. But, and that's what I said before, this can also be true, like the male stereotype can also be met by women and the female stereotype by men, but usually you have the feeling it doesn't really fit. A man who does this female stereotypes maybe has for himself or by others the idea, am I really seen as a man? That's what I did in my PhD thesis, writing about male kindergarten teachers. So this was the background on what is care and what is our background for this, and now I will come to 3 different points. The ideal scientist and researcher is one of this. Then I have some examples from a research we did at German Youth-Institut, care during the pandemic, fathers and care, because this is one of my main topics. Then we have the idea that time for care as an individual problem, which is often seen to be something I have to solve, my care problem, or can we say care is a problem for society, something that we have all together to find solutions to this. So I start with the ideal researcher, and now I hope you will understand what I mean. I tried to Google physicist, and I had to do it in German because it doesn't work in English. And I found out that Google, if you Google the German word Physiker, so the male version, you only find men, which is not surprising, but as we always say, I use the male form and I think it includes everyone. Google says no, male version of Physica only includes rather old gray hair man in front of black boards writing formula. And I thought, okay, this is what physicists do. And of course you can't see care work in this, but you see that the idea what it might look like. So I come to the, again, very stereotypical ideas. The carefree scientist is available for science at all times. You can wake him up during the night, or even when he's taking a shower or whatever, he might be thinking about some scientific research. He can travel everywhere, can be absent for longer times, can go to conferences. In international contexts, can work through time differences, which also, do you hear me? It's a bit strange here. Okay. So working hours are not adapted to opening hours of care institutions, for example. If you work around the clock, there might be problems with your care at home. And here work is meant as scientific work. It doesn't include work, care work, work for others. Success, as you all know, in scientific community is to publish findings, to go somewhere, to be seen. So this scientist, he or she, subordinates other needs and also needs for him or herself to gaining scientific knowledge. And this is a quite typical male biography that can fulfill these ideas of being a scientist. Of course, again, this can also be lived by women, and I don't say it's bad, it's just like the idea that leads to success. This, on the other hand, excludes quite a lot of people and of concepts of life. For example, people who take on care work, people for whom scientific work shouldn't be the only focus in life, people with special needs, care needs, people who have phases in which they themselves need care. This can be illnesses, this can be mental problems, and people who have a life course that is not that linear, where you go like this and this and this and this, and then suddenly you have to admit, oh, this doesn't lead to becoming a professor, for example. And this is quite a typical female working biography. So the question is how to solve this idea of being successful in a scientific community when you don't have the typical biography, when you don't have, for example, if you remember the numbers I told you, how much time people or mothers spent with their children during the pandemic. In this time, maybe they couldn't write 2 or 3 papers which other colleagues could write. And now the question is, how can we take care of this? How can we, there's this one idea, like you write your CV and you write into your CV, I got 2 children. And then you make it public, and people should be thinking, okay, she couldn't write that many papers, she had 2 children. But at the same time, you publish something very personal about yourself, and maybe you don't want to make this so seen to everybody. And also you think this shouldn't be like, they think, okay, she has 2 children, maybe she will work just part-time and she won't be the typical scientist who has time to do scientific work at all stages of their life, and maybe their children are sick or whatever. So how can we put this back into success? And this is what I meant with care needs time, and sometimes it needs time just in the moment that it's needed. And you can't say, okay, it's also care work to do the tax income things, or you go and do the gardening stuff, or you repair the car. This is also care work that has to be done, but it doesn't have this in situ necessity. You can say, okay, the garden I will do on Sunday. And you can't say during the night the child is crying, you can say, okay, I will change the diaper on Sunday. So there are different kinds of care work, and what I mean is you have to make them visible, and you have to talk in relationships, but also you have to register them, and you try to see what is success in the research. And this is what happens if you Google on English. You see the English version of Google sees female physicists as physicists, at least. Female, other color of people, younger people. So I come to the point of care during the pandemic, fathers and care. And what we did is, we have a project. We did interviews in 3 different interview waves. We interviewed 20 parents, 5 fathers, 50 mothers, in the first wave, and then the same. We wanted to interview all of them again, but this is normal, gets less. But we have at 3 times talked to parents during the pandemic how they reconcile family work and employed work needs. We talked to them about 45 minutes or nearly an hour, and I found 2 examples now for you of the fathers. And what we wanted to do is to understand how did parents try to combine paid and unpaid work needs during the pandemic. And we have 2 focus, and one was on parents in leading positions, and one was on parents that are separated from the other parent. So we can now say parents in a relationship try to or could combine care work and unpaid work needs differently from parents that are separated or live without a relationship. Of course, parents without a relationship usually had no possibility to divide their tasks and time, and they had to do care work and paid work roughly at the same time and at the same place. In a relationship, you have, in a way, 2 possibilities, at least theoretically. We have the one kind of couple who did a division of tasks, and this is often rather typical according to gendered stereotypes. So the mother does the care work and the father does the paid work. Or we have a division of time by time. So you have fathers and mothers that said, in the morning, one of you is doing the paid work and the other one is doing the children, and then we change at 12 o'clock or whatever. And this depends, in a way, on the gendered partnership models these parents have. And now I can show you 2 different kind of fathers. We have Michael Müller, and this is an interview from a quotation from the interview. He says, the first lockdown was a disaster, but now in the second one, you've got used to it a little bit. And at this point, I can really only endorse that, because I'm also at home, it's also been quite a support for her. So what he presents is he is a support for his wife doing her care work. He doesn't say, we share. He says, I support her, and I can support her more than I usually do, because usually he's not there during the week. He's working in another city, and now he says everything is getting better because I am here and can support him. we interpret this, and this is what we do in this interview project, as a certain idea of fatherhood, which means a father is the one who earns the money for the family, and his wife is basically main carer, even though she has a job as well. This leads to, for example, the segregation in the house. The father, and this is typical, we have this in other interviews as well, has a rather undisturbed office somewhere in the house, can close the door and come out when he's done with his work. While the mother, if she's working, sits on the kitchen table and does work, and the children are playing somewhere. And if the postman rings, she has to open, and then she cooks the lunch or whatever. For him, the pandemic was quite positive. He had less commuting, more time at home, and he felt like a better support for the family. So this is his idea of fatherhood. And on the other hand, we have another father, Norbert Niehage, who says there was the requirement to leave your child at home, if at all possible, and we have followed this. But in the last 8 to 10 weeks, the pressure of care, homeschooling, home office has increased massively, yes, and has basically ensured that the effort of coordination within the family has increased significantly, and with it, of course, the competition between individual interests. So this is an example for a father who has a wife who are both in very responsible positions at their jobs, and they try to share care work, which means it's not like the so-called natural role model that they can just use. You can just say, okay, your work is care work and my work is earning the money, but they have conflicts all the time. They have to fight who's important, whose work is important, who has the more important appointment. And this leads to much more trouble in the family. And sometimes you feel like it's so much easier to just have the traditional role model. But of course, we have seen before, this has also consequences for many other parts in your life, like success in your work. So here we see another concept of fatherhood and partnership, which also for the father includes care work as work and as something he has to do and does for the family. Okay, as I just said, time for care is often seen as an individual problem. Especially in the pandemic, it was also politically seen as an individual problem. Institutional care, at least for childcare, closed for, I don't know, I think it's 6 months in total in Germany. In other countries, it was only some weeks. But it went in a way back to the idea like childcare, care work, housework is something the families, they will manage. We don't care who does this. And this was really an example for going back to the 1960s, but also an example for what many people seem to think. Care is my individual problem. If I get children, I have to find a solution how to do this. And this is what makes it so destroying in a way. If you always think, how will I solve this? The feeling is, I have to do it correctly. If I don't do it, if my child has bad grades at school, it might be my fault. I am not there to teach him in the afternoon because I'm working. It also leads to the idea that care work is outsourced or negated. People think housework is nothing that needs time. And a family with 4 or even more members has a lot of housework to do. And this cannot but be neglected. Like you can say, okay, we take the children to kindergarten, or to school or wherever. But still, you have to clean the washing and do the grocery shopping and all these things, which are in a way made invisible, and people who can afford this source it out and give it to people who earn less money than they do, so they can afford somebody else to do the work they can't do because their paid work is more important. It also means people try to self-optimize themselves. They do night shifts or even have the idea that the self-care is now something I have to optimize. Like, oh, now I didn't do my yoga lessons in the morning and I need to do this. And now there's another thing on my to-do list. I have to do the yoga course. And this is also the idea that you yourself are responsible that you feel good. And this also leads to social inequality. It also depends on who has which resources, who has grandparents living nearby that can take care of the children, who can afford for the school extra lessons, who can afford for a cleaning assistance, and who does this. Especially in the pandemic, we saw that parents or mothers were supposed to do all the teaching. And I don't know if any of you experienced this, but to teach somebody how to read and to learn to write is usually not a competence everybody has. And it's very much dependent on your own motivation. If you think this is important, you might sit there and try to make your children learn to read. But if you don't think it's that important, you don't do it. And this is something that leads to inequality in education and in money. And this is what we see now from the pandemic, that there are lots of children who didn't get this time, this care work of parents, because it was supposed to be individualized. And this is something really in other countries than Germany that was impossible to have the idea to close schools for 3 or 4 months. And this led, and that was what we see now, for parents to mental health issues, for children as well, to stress, to burnout. We have this in our interviews, parents telling us they had nervous breakdowns, they have depressions, they didn't have time for self-care, no breaks, no me time. And this can also be found in, this is from the government, German government. They looked at all research, or basically the big studies that were done during the pandemic, and they now see the consequences of these long school closures, extreme exhaustion with parents, especially single parents, mental health problems, financial problems for those who couldn't work. I mean, the home office was just the better side of the coin, so to say. But there are jobs you can't do home office, and then you either quit your job or you couldn't do the care work. And as I just said, growing social inequality. But also for the children, we see this now, this led to very ambivalent perception with the children. On the one hand, and this is mostly what parents say, it's not what the children say, there are not many children weren't asked during the pandemic, but many parents say their children were sad and lonely and they missed their friends and they didn't have anyone to talk to, especially families with just one child. But they also felt quite safe and happy in their families, and this is something we see in our interviews as well. They say, we spent so much time, we went to all the forests around, we were outside all the time, we could, I don't know, teach them to ride the bicycle or whatever, like very nice family time, but we find this only in the first wave of our interviews. And the second wave, no parent at all said, we had a nice time together and we could spend so much time in the garden or whatever. And the weather was bad. And the summer, the weather was so nice. That's what they all said to us. And then the second wave, we have now 1 meter of snow. We can't go outside. We are all getting crazy. Then we see in this research a lack of prevention. This means if children go to kindergarten, there are grown-ups who see what happens to the children. They see they don't feel well, they see they might be hurt, they experience violence, they see they don't eat correctly, or all these things couldn't be seen if the children are at home with their families. And for example, therapies discontinued and were interrupted in this time. This leads to learning deficits, especially from families from disadvantaged families. We have another research project at the German Youth Institute where they interviewed families from disadvantaged backgrounds. And we in our research have very well situated families, but they really looked for families with other problems. And they said, for example, we have only one table in our house. So we have 3 children. They are all sitting at the same table trying to do their homeschooling, and as soon as one of them starts talking, the others can't listen to their teacher anymore. Or we have one mobile phone, and they try to do the homeschooling on a mobile phone, and the teacher was wondering, why can't you see what I write here? And they said, I'm looking on the mobile phone, try to follow the lessons. And this is again a completely different story than when we talk to families with parents in leading positions. What we also find, or what this research finds, is significant increase in depression, especially among girls, anxiety disorder and eating disorders, and with the boys, a significant increase in obesity compared to girls and pre-pandemic. So this is why I said care cannot be seen as an individual problem. It is something society has to find solutions, and which is very dependent on institutional care as well. It's not everything. You also need to invest private time, and this makes the care relationships more attractive, but it also has to be seen as something society has to solve. So that's why I come to my final point: time for care as a social problem or as a social solution. What we learned also from our interviews in the pandemic is that sharing the caring helps a lot, and this share might be either in the partnership or what we often found is a network of supporters, like institutional care on the one hand, grandparents, neighbors, friends, who make time without care possible, but also who make, and time without care means also paid work possible. And this is something we try to do some further research on now, like how can we stabilize these kind of networks that functioned quite well in the second lockdown. Many of the interviewees told us we have like the neighbor, we are very close with the neighbor, we have our grandparents moved in or whatever, and now we try to find solutions that go over the time, because in this third wave of the interviews, many people told us, yeah, we had this network, but now we are back into our usual day and they don't play a role anymore. So what can help, and this is, for example, other living environments, the idea of meeting points where people can meet and on a very low level share care work. We also saw that grandparents and especially grandmothers are a particular important position, especially for single parents. Many single parents said after a while we couldn't leave out grandparents anymore from our care network, even though the grandparents were of course those that you shouldn't meet. That was the first they said is don't meet your grandparents, and many of them said, okay, we can't do without our grandparents. In the case of separated households, separated parents, we saw two ways. We saw on the one hand those who suffered from being separated and being alone and being responsible every day, all the time, or if they had conflict relationship with their ex-partner, even though when the children were away it was still not relaxing because they felt responsible and were afraid that the children were not very good cared for by the ex-partner. But we also found parents who were very happy that they had their children only every second week. Or if they could, for example, in stressful times, they could ask the other parent to take care of the children. And if this relationship with the ex-partner is working well, it helps in a way because you have two households where children can go to. Even though most people don't want this concept, sometimes it has its advantages. And we have these neighbors, as I just said. So I have now some questions for you to take home, but maybe also to discuss with me now. How can care work be recognized better and perceived better? Care work, and that's also what we learned, should not be invisible, but is important for everybody. Nobody can live without care work. All people need time for care work, regardless of their family status. This is often, it sounds like this is only about parents, only about people who have smaller children. But there's, in every life circle, there is this time where people need care. And it's also regardless of profession, of gender, of income, whatever. And this is the last point down there. Care work needs, on the one hand, institutional support. This is the one big thing we need. We need very good childcare, very good care for older people, very good care for sick, ill people with mental health problems, whatever. But we also need space and time for the individual organization of care, like having time for relationships. And this does not only mean family, it also means like civil engagement. You do things in your kindergarten, or you go in a political party or whatever. This is also care work for society. So my first ideas are we can think about living environments that facilitate care work, and that makes it possible that there's less responsibility for the heterosexual nuclear family that is responsible for the care work. But there should be other ideas like caring communities, people living together to care for each other. And of course better childcare, elderly care with better opening hours, better educated staff, a good payment for those working there, and a better recognition. But now if you have ideas and if you want to, you can now think about this, ask me questions, ask your neighbor some questions, develop ideas, what can help you, what can help society, and you can just start talking a bit, and we have, I think, 5 minutes. If you want to ask questions, just go ahead. Thank you.